Well, for those of you that are in organizations that are progressive, and those of you that are hiring managers who care very deeply about representation and diversity, let me suggest a few things. So first, starting with how we look at what a leader should look like. A latest Harvard Business Review research talked about women of color's different type of leadership skills, but just as relevant. So let me talk about those three. So obviously, a lot of times leadership, we assume confidence equals competence, but that is what this article is rejecting, because obviously some people come across as very confident, but they're not necessarily good at their job. So the three leadership capital that's perhaps worth considering for these women of color or Asian American women in particular are navigational capital, resistance capital, and linguistic capital. So what do I mean by navigational capital? Well, that is when you're able to bootstrap. I mentioned in the immigrant communities, most of these families come from war-torn area or they come from poverty-stricken areas. And yet when they come to the US, they're able to really climb the ladder of success, right? So that navigational capital, being able to bootstrap, being able to be very resourceful is definitely a worthy leadership capital to consider. The second is resistance capital. And what do I mean by that? Well, again, many of these new immigrants come from countries with authoritarian regimes or very restrictive class structure. And yet again, when they're able to come to the US, they're relying on some of those resistance and advocacy skills. And I definitely have seen this in my own family and in distant relatives' families where the children are actually the one advocating for the parents because of the children's language skills. So being able to, at a young age, represent the family, represent the community is another form of resistance or / advocacy capital that's very relevant for a leader. And then lastly, as I said earlier about the consumer demands rising and that India and China are geared up to be the largest consumer segments in the world. So having that linguistic and cultural capital is very important in being able to shed a light on what these consumers could want and how to better situate the companies to take on this market. So those three capital is worth considering, right? In checking our biases as far as what a leader should look like. The second thing is to give opportunities and to sponsor and support these ERG employee resource groups. And I know at this conference, there are many speakers talking about that. So I'm sure you could get more information about how to start one or how to support one. But I want to encourage you to also think about how in these immigrant communities, Asian American women can definitely take a leadership role with some of these ERGs. And in taking leadership, they're more likely to be noticed by the top management and to also, again, see how they can demonstrate the three leadership capitals I just talked about. So navigational capital, resistance capital, and linguistic capital. So allowing them to be active in the ERGs will help with demonstrating their leadership, but also in that earlier chart about Bain and Company, that the belonging and inclusion is also very important. And so by having an active ERG, having the sponsorship, having the support from the highest level in the company, that will all help with the inclusion and the belonging efforts at the company level. And third, I want to talk about how communities can be important too. So as I said, whether, across the different ethnic diaspora, that all these different communities have different needs. And again, if you can sponsor and support your Asian American employees to be active in these communities, they'll give them a chance to shine in their own community and help their own community. But also, again, it's leadership training, right? When you give them the chance to really do something for their community, align their purpose with the company's mission, and help their own community, that's really going to be helpful in terms of training them to be future leaders. So that's the three things I would encourage companies to look at. One, checking those biases as to what a leader should look like. And two, sponsor and support those employee resource groups as much as you can. And three, do the community outreach and encourage your Asian American women employees to go out into their communities and do something extraordinary, such that they can come back and bring some of the leadership skills they learn and deliver that in their own company.